everyone, welcome to this how-to webinar on embedding this week. First of all, some logistic. You can all hear me. I tested it out, but if you have any questions, you are all muted, and that's all okay because we are going to take your question in the Q&A box during the session, and at the end of the session, you have the occasion to ask questions live to our awesome presenter. If you haven't heard of me before, if you haven't been to an event, I'm Geraldine Zanoni, aka Gigi. I'm a developer advocate at Tableau, and I'm just going to be the host for today's sessions. So today we are going to go over the embedding challenges. We are Claire that is going to show the level 1, Loic level 2, and Chris for level 3 for these DataDev mini challenges. But first, what are they? These DataDev mini challenges. So the DataDev mini challenges is 3 months of fun challenges. I think we have been already at, we've been in our 7th week, I think, so far. And we have 18 challenges in total. So we have a lot of diverse challenges with different topics and different levels. We have indeed 3 levels: easy, moderate, and advanced. So if you are just starting with one of our APIs, you can start by the easy level. And if you already know everything about extension API, you can just get started with the advanced level. But most of the people are starting with easy, going first, and then moderate and advanced. They finish the week with an advanced levels, so that you can see a real progression in terms of difficulty. We have 3 categories. So we are focusing on extensibility, automation and integration, and embedding. The last 2 weeks were about embedding. It was challenges that were covering the embedding topic. But every 2 weeks, we are publishing a new set of challenges to be solved. The second week, except this week, that's the exception, we have an API-focused webinars. We already talked about the JavaScript API, extension API, and the REST API. So you have presenters. So we are changing presenters as people from engineers or product manager from the engineering team. And we also host every 2 weeks a webinar like this one, where the DataDev members are explaining how they solve the mini challenges. Of course, one of the main prizes for doing the challenges is learning. It's a learning experience where you can learn about our APIs and new use cases, because all the challenges are with real use cases, real life use cases. So, but you can also win some prizes, some swag. So level 1, you win a DataDev stickers pack if you submit a level 1 and you validate it, of course. Level 2, you win a DataDev water bottle. And level 3, you win a 2020 DataDev t-shirts and a beanie. How awesome is that? How to win? First, you need to be part of a developer program. So if you're all on the call today, it means you're already part of a developer program, because it's just, we send out an invitation just for the members of a developer program. But if a friend or colleagues want to join the challenges, the first thing they need to do is join the developer program. Then, once you are done with the challenges, you need to validate the challenges. You have a set of submissions rules for each challenge that you can find on our website. So if you didn't follow anything from the 5 minutes I'm talking, or you want to get more information, it's just one information to remember is this URL that I'm going to post in the chat, where you can find all the mini challenges, the rules, the past challenges as well, if you want to go back to time we did the automation and integration topic. So go on our website and check out the challenges and the rules as well. So for the level 1, we ask the DataDev community to create an embedding page with a visualization from the Tableau online site. For that, we have Claire. Claire has been an amazing member of the DataDev community. I think, Claire, you did all the different challenges. Most of them, every 2 weeks, you are going to you submitted a challenge, I think. So on the first day, Claire was there and trying to solve the challenges. So Claire, the stage is all yours. I'm going to give you the presenter role.
Hi, everyone. I hope you all safe and healthy during this turbulent time. My name is Claire. I'm a business data analyst at StreetShares. My company provides lending software services to financial institutions. So for today's agenda, I would like to briefly talk about how I get started with the data developer program, and then to show you guys my embedding solution for level 1. So a little bit of background about myself. I've been using Tableau for about a year now. And in my day-to-day work using Tableau, I tend to focus on analyzing data within my organization to enhance the business process. So I have never had any JavaScript coding experience before doing the mini challenges. And after a month doing multiple challenges, I would say I have become an immature JavaScript developer. There are multiple resources I would like to mention to any JavaScript newbie here. So I've been taking a class from Udemy. It is definitely really helpful for me to understanding the JavaScript script structure in depth. For the previous 2 challenges, I didn't really have time to taking any classes, so I was really just replicate what are the simple code or other people's resource I find online, but I didn't really understanding the structure or why I'm using certain functions. And second, as Gigi mentioned, I think the data developers Slack community is definitely really helpful. I have received multiple helps from different people. And my advice here is do not hesitate to ask question and do not think you're asking a stupid question. I think lastly, definitely using the mini challenges, I've been learned a lot. And who doesn't like free t-shirt, right? So without further ado, let me go to the solution. So level 1, as Gigi already mentioned, is to replace the embedded code using your own dashboard to a web page. On the left, I have taken a screenshot from the resource page. There are 2 things I would like to call out here for any newbies. So you have to pay attention here on the first highlight is to make sure you update the JavaScript API file that's matching your Tableau server. I can show you where to find that in a second. And the second here is to update the URL link to your own dashboard. So let's jump into the actual work. This page I find is very useful for you to do a very easy level 1 challenge. And here under the concept, you can actually see what are the server version that's matching with the JavaScript API files. Another useful information I find in this page is if you don't want to have a non-access to your non-minified files, you can just also remove the .min here on your JavaScript. And second, I'm going to show you where to find the URL link. I've been using the Superstore sample data, and I've created a very simple bar chart here. All you need to do is to go to the share link and copy paste this link. I didn't use the copy embedded code here because I'm also using the same code for my level 2. And if you use the copy embedded code, you won't be able to add any additional filter in your web page, say if you need to add the filter box or anything else. So I've just copy paste this link, and you can ignore everything after the question mark as well. And third, this is my actual HTML file. For this file, all you need to, it pretty much contains 4 parts here. First is to create a web page as we've seen before. And I just removed the .min here on my JavaScript API. Second, you need to create a div element in the page to make sure that's where you insert the Tableau viz. Third, you write a function pretty much to initialize the visualization here. And I have I've copy pasted my own dashboard link right here. And the last step is to make sure you call the function when the page is downloading, which I have the unload initialize this here. And I've also added a title for my visualization just to make it look a little bit neater. And we can see it in a second. It's actually right here. It's showing my dashboard from my own data server into this new web page here. That's it. Let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Claire. So now we are going to talk about the level 2, and for that we have Loic. I don't know if I pronounce your name the French way or the right way. So I hope I pronounce. And Loic is based in Germany, and is here to show us the level 2. We ask the data dev community to spice up your embedding page by adding more functionality. So with the advantage of the JavaScript API is this two-way communication. You can communicate from the website, the application to Tableau, and Tableau to the web applications. So how was the challenge, Loic? You are muted if you don't want to answer. I unmuted you, so now we can see your screen.
Okay. Can you all hear me, guys?
I think all good.
Okay, cool. My name was pronounced really well, Gigi. I'm Loic. As the German says, Loic. Yeah, I'm a consultant here in Germany at Siemens AG. I'm a native French speaker, so excuse if my English not so well. So sorry in advance. Yeah, I've been getting started. My team is working basically on starting using Tableau dashboards for our clients for a little while, and this is what attracted me to the Tableau community. I've been using back the day at school Power BI, and then I moved to Tableau, and I was really amazed of the different APIs that are available in Tableau. So I get started with the filter API, and it was pretty cool. So now I'm gonna show you basically how I basically tackle the challenge number 2 about the filter. So for start, I'm going to be switching to the page. So basically, the challenge was to show the two-way communication between a visualization that is embedded in my dashboard and my application, and basically use some functionalities that are provided by the JavaScript API to basically do that, like getting filters and basically get the and show the different apply value of those different filters, and basically at the same time being able to respond to events that come from Tableau. So let's jump to a demo where I will show you how it looked like, guys. So this is basically the page I've built. As you can see, there is a basic Tableau dashboard that come from my Tableau developer site that you can all get when you sign into the developer program, as Gigi explained at the beginning. And basically here is a couple of filters here. One which filter by region on the US, and I also have an action filter that filter these worksheets here when I select a specific US state. So basically, when you're going to see when I filter, for example, a specific region, if you like look a little bit here, I'll show here, I will filter by Central. So you look, my application did react to the filter happening in Tableau and just show only the region Central. And I can actually do it back, so I can select all. And then at the same time, my application did react and show the different region values, which is really great. But also what is great is that I actually was able to, when you click on a specific action filter, for example, you can select Colorado, I also filter too, which is also great. Yes, I also implemented a button here on the front where when I click on this, I'm basically able to filter the entire, to clear the entire set of filters on the dashboard. Yes, so this is basically it. So how did I build that? Before I show you the code, I may like to show you which resources I've been using for that. So there is a well-documented documentation, sorry, about the JavaScript API on Tableau Help platform. There's basically everything there to get you started. If you go to the resource here, you have really a set of API. Oh, this is the wrong link. This is the right link. Yeah. So okay, you have like a small tutorial that show you the different things you can do with the API. It's basically a step-by-step tutorial that just show you how to implement the API. And you have concepts here which show you different concepts about filtering events, and I think you should really take a little bit of time, as I also done, to basically learn about how to perform asynchronous call in JavaScript, which is really important because almost any interaction you're going to be basically doing with the Tableau server is going to happen asynchronous, since the Tableau server is executing the filters and all different actions on the server side of the application. So basically everything happens asynchronous. So it's really important to learn about things like promises and stuff like that. Also, there are also this event concept here, where you can use this event to basically react to different events that happens on a Tableau dashboard embedded into your page. I also wanted to show you the reference page, where basically here is well documented everything about the different object structure, so the classes and the different functions that are available and give it to you by the Tableau API. So you have an entire structure of representing the dashboard, which basically is a workbook that contains one or more different worksheets that can be like one dashboard, which can contain different worksheets, and you have an entire hierarchy there. So once you learn that hierarchy, the class hierarchy, you can basically take a look at the different classes and the different functions that are available. There are almost everything you may want to need there to do, like interaction or filtering, for example. For my challenge, basically, I had to use the filter event class, for example, to basically listen for a filter event, and I had to use also, again, the workbook class to get the different worksheet informations, and I also had to use the mark events class, for example, for the actions filters. So let's dive into the code. I hope the code is not really scary for some people, but I think you at least have some prior experience with JavaScript before, but I will try to explain it a little bit. And then I will share the code on GitHub also. This is basically the project. It's also available on GitHub. I will share the link after the presentation. Basically, it is an HTML file and a JavaScript file. The HTML file basically has on its head basically a script tag to reference again the Tableau JavaScript API, as Claire explained to you, and I also have embedded script, my own custom script here to basically program the different functions for the API. Here I have this init visualization function that basically load my dashboard at the beginning of the page. When the page gets started, get loaded, and here I have a couple of HTML elements to show basically the filters. So I have created a table. By the way, I'm using Bootstrap for the one who didn't recognize that this is basically a framework to who makes it easy to like show well-designed things without having so many effort, like colors and stuff like that, and buttons. You can use Bootstrap for that. I have a table here basically, and on that table, I'm basically showing two column. One is for the filter name, and one is for the apply value. And in this part here, the body of the table, I'm basically going to be using JavaScript to print out the actual representation of the filters and the respective apply value on the dashboard. So let's go to the script.js to see what is inside of it. Once the body HTML get loaded, my code jump into this init phase function, which is basically the starting point of my application. And what I'm basically doing is that I'm declaring this container div that basically is the this container, basically the div that contains my dashboard. I grab the URL of my Tableau dashboard, which is basically on my developer side that you will all get when you're going to be signing on the developer program. And I have an option objects here, which is basically a JavaScript object that basically is the options that I'm going to be using to specify how to interact with my dashboard or my worksheet, basically on Tableau, once I create these. So once I have this URL to my Tableau dashboard and the optional object, I can basically here create a what we call a V's object, and the V's object is basically let me just show you again. Is basically the starting point of my dashboard. It's basically the wrapper around the entire dashboard in your application. So, and that freeze object basically you will basically be able to interact with that only if you have set this function here on first interactive. So this is basically a property of this option object that you're going to set. It's going to be a function. And basically the thing here is that this function is going to be called once the V's object get initialized. And then here you can start doing the work you want to do with the dashboard. So once I'm not going to be diving into deep into the code. Actually, write a couple of comments here, as you can see, to help you guys. Maybe if you want to read the code on GitHub later. So I hope these comments can be helpful. But I'm just going to give you an overview of what happens and show you the different functions that I've used from the API. So here, what I'm basically doing is that I'm getting the different worksheets. You know, a Tableau a dashboard is basically composed of different worksheets, and I program a function that basically get my visualization, that basically get my workbook from the visualization, get the active sheet, which is basically the dashboard, and then get the worksheets out of this dashboard and gives it as a list. And once I have this list of worksheets, I actually program a function that will process the filter on the worksheet. By the way, if you didn't actually understand why I do that, why I get the worksheet, is because each different worksheet have a set of filter that are attached to it. So this is where the process filter function here, I'm jumping here, basically, and this is where I'm basically getting the filter from the worksheet, and then I'm going to receive all the filter for every worksheet. And then once I'm going to get the filter for every worksheet, I'm going to flatten the array, because we can have like many filters for the worksheet. And I need to flatten the array and remove the duplicates out of the filter, because you can have the same filter on different worksheets. So to save a little bit of processing time here, I'm doing that. And basically here, this last function is basically the key thing of my function, which is going to be displaying the filters objects in the DOM, so the HTML. So let's look at the function a little bit to see what's it done. So what this display value filter function will receive the filters objects. By the way, if you want to know how the filter objects looks like, you can still go to the documentation and then go to the filter class here, and you can see the different parameters of the filter class to see how to get the filter name, for example, and to get I think the value should be also somewhere. I will show you in the code. It will also be there. So I get the filters array here, and I'm basically doing a simple thing. So I iterate over each filter using the for each function. of an array. And then I'm just looking of the filter that are from type categorical, because I don't care if you have like filters for measures or things like that, or different other filter. I'm focusing on those types. And then what I've been doing is that for every filter, there is a function, there is an attribute here, as you can see, which is called apply value. That's basically the list of every value objects that are supplied on the filter currently. And then I'm just displaying a span of the value. And at the same time, I also add the filter caption, which is basically the so my role would be the filter caption, which is basically the title of the filter, so the name of the filter. And in the TD here, I'm printing out those spans with the apply value, as you can see here. Once I will update that once. So those are the spans of the different filter values. So yeah, so after that I take this HTML that I built, and then I just printing out into a filter container element, which is basically a filter table body element that I've created on my HTML. It's basically here. So this is where I'm going to be printing out those different values, and they will be showing on screen. Now, for the now, how does my dashboard how does my application react to to those filter actions that happens on the dashboard? And this is really the cool part, and this is basically what happens after I process the filter for the first time. So the initial filtering, basically what I'm doing is that I'm listening to different Tableau events. And after I do this for the first time, I can use the V's object that I've told you before to basically add event listeners. So basically a function where you can add what we call a callback that will be called when specific events is going to be happening on the dashboard. For example, a filter may change, or a mask could be selected on the dashboard, and then you receive an event object. That event object will give you different information about the visualizations, and then you can do again. So basically what I'm doing is that I'm listening for filter events on the dashboard, and if each time I receive an event on my callback function here, I basically reprocess the function. So I'm doing this again all the time when the filter may change. I'm doing this also for the mark selections, because if you like do a click, for example, on a switch here, if you do a click, for example, this you're selecting a mark, and if I do that, this basically also trigger an action, and I'm reprocessing the different function to the filter, and I get the values here. So that's the magic basically behind that. And yeah, yes, so basically that's it. And again, for the clear function of the filter, I also use a function here. I don't want to get deep into that, but this is basically at the end of the day, you can get that worksheet object, and then you can pass in the name of the filter that you want to delete or to clear, and you can use this clear for the filter function here to clear the function. So yeah, so basically this is the magic behind that. And this is pretty interesting. I hope I inspire you. I hope I didn't afraid you so much with so many codes. So again, I will share the code later on, and yeah. So one thing I've left. Let's go back to the presentation.
Perfect. Thank you. I think. Oh, do you have...
Yeah, I had a thank you slide left. Oh. Yeah.
Thank you for Loic for presenting and inspire us, and thank you all for all the comments you put on your code as well. I think it's going to be really helpful for anyone that is going to look at your code. Thank you. So now let's go. We stay in Europe. We are going to go to Chris. Chris is based in the UK, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
I am indeed.
Perfect. You did the level 3. Level 3, we challenged the data dev to build your own portal with Tableau recommendation. Tableau recommendation has been the endpoint for REST API has been released. When was it? 2020.2. So it's a pretty new endpoint for the REST API. And Portal is a really important piece of embedding for certain users that want to have a portal, a place where they have all the visualizations and click on different visualizations. So Chris, the WebEx is all yours. We can already see your screen.
Fantastic. Thanks, Gigi. And thanks for Claire and Loic so far as well. Those are great, really well explained answers, and I'm hoping I can keep the standard up. So, hi everybody. My name is Chris Hasty. I'm a data engineer at Interworks. We, as a company, do have a full team and a product based around all of the JavaScript API, REST API, etc. I'm not part of that team, so my knowledge is nothing like theirs, and I've not really used it at all for this. But just for transparency's sake, we do have a team that are much more experienced than me on this. But this challenge was actually my first time really journeying into the JavaScript API. I haven't done the rest. I started on embedding. I need to do some catching up. So the goal of this challenge was to build an interface where a user can log in and they will see all of their recommended views, and then they can click on one of those recommended views to load up that particular visualization. The end product that I've put together is this view here, where you can see I have a username and password. I select to retrieve my recommended views. I do apologize, it's not the quickest, but it then pings up these views. I did get a bit lazy. I put up several copies of the same view just to feed that review engine very quickly, that recommended engine very quickly. But then we have here 4 different views that are recommended for our user. And if I were to select any one of those, then you can see my dashboard loading up underneath, and I can click any of those different elements and we can see it is indeed the full dashboard with all the functionality. And clicking on any one of these other views will always load up the latest one. So that was the challenge and the goal. I go back to my PowerPoint. There were a couple of hints on how to get this working. Firstly, to use the Tableau embedding playbook, and secondly, to use the REST API. To be honest, I saw this, and when I saw the REST API, I felt a little bit happier because I'm not very experienced with the JavaScript API and the JavaScript side, but I have played a lot more in Python with the REST API, so that was a little bit of a breather for me. The Tableau embedding playbook hint, I think, was mainly drawing attention to this element. So this is just taken directly from that link and that website. But the plan to follow, and I followed a very similar one, was to allow the user to sign in, pass their login credentials through the REST API, log into the REST API, retrieve the list of recommended views for that user, and then use this grab preview image link on bullet point 3 here. So I looped through that to return each preview image and then pull that through into an object in my HTML page that acts as a hyperlink. So that was the main plan, and you can see the get recommendations for views was part of the REST API using this particular endpoint. And the specific hint here was to, obviously, in order to do this, we'll first need to know how to access this REST API, how to access the API version and the site ID, etc. So one thing I always do when I'm playing around with any form of API, I can just go straight into using the code, but I prefer to use a tool to make things a little bit easier. The tool that I personally use for things like this is a tool called Postman. If you Google Postman software, you can find this tool. And that's where we're going to start out our walkthrough of my solution and how I came about it today. So if we close down the slide deck, I began in Postman here. And we can see the idea behind Postman is I can send a particular request to a URL location and I can pass in information. So the way a request works, and requests are the primary way to handle any API, is a standard request involves an originating point sending a message to an endpoint. So in our case, our endpoint is the Tableau REST API. And with that request that we send to the endpoint, we may attach various different pieces of information to help that endpoint understand what we want. So as an example, before doing anything with the REST API, we first need to authenticate to that API, or effectively log in. And to do that, we send a request through to the login string. So my Tableau server is at online.tableau.com, or specifically 10ax.online.tableau.com. The version of that server is 3.8, and the specific endpoint for this would be the auth/sign-in endpoint. This is all available on the documentation as well if you follow that same link in the hint on the embedding page, on the challenges page, then it will take you to a full documentation showing all of this. But what we can do is simply send a request through to here with a particular body, and that is the critical part to authenticate to any API. So what I'm using is, specifically, I'm using a JSON structure. You don't have to use JSON. You can use XML if you prefer, and depending on other APIs, you can use other elements. But we're using a JSON string, and the documentation specifically requests a credentials object with the name, the password, and then a separate site object containing a content URL. So the username and password, those are nice and easy to achieve. Those are just your username and password for Tableau Server. The site content URL is specifically, once you've logged into your site, that is just the name really of the site, but it's reduced to not have any spaces or anything like that. And it's the version of the site that you will see in the URL bar on your internet browser when looking at any of your sites. If you don't see a site ID, that usually means that you're on the default site and you'll just see a hashtag instead. If you want to access that default site, you can actually just leave the content URL here. I could just leave that blank. And if I left that blank, then Tableau will default to that default site. And when we send this request through, then that request goes off to the API processes it, authenticates, makes sure it's okay. And then if it is, it sends through this response. And we can see this response here where the most interesting elements, we have a site ID. So that is the unique identifier for our site. Instead of using kind of a text base or a familiar name, like the content URL is, the site ID is more the machine name underneath. And we have this credentials token, and that's the main thing we need. So this credentials token is what allows us to then interact with the API and not have to always send our username and password, but instead we can just keep sending the same token in each of our requests. So specifically for signing in, here I was talking about the body. There is a separate element to a request, also known as the header. So similar to HTML, where you have a header and a body. Requests have headers, bodies, and there are other things that we won't get into. All we really need to know for this are our header and our body. Right now, our header, Postman is quite good at this. It's automatically filled in a load of headers for us, so we haven't really had to worry about it. And I'll show you when we reach the code in a moment, the specific headers, etc., that I've used for this. However, before we do, I'm going to jump across to another tab on Postman. And this is specifically the recommendations type view, or the endpoint to retrieve those recommended views. So what I have here is, again, I have my host name, my version, and my site ID. Ignore the double brackets. Those are just parameters in Postman. But you can see my site ID is actually this 0883DEBA-C6C1, etc. My body is now empty because I'm using what's known as a GET request instead of a POST request. Don't worry too much about what those are. Usually it's just a GET request is retrieving something without sending something itself, whereas a POST request is sending a body with it. That's not a strict rule, but it's just an easy thing to kind of follow when you're getting the hang of this. The easier thing to bear in mind is when you're looking at the documentation on Tableau's website, that document will tell you whether you need a GET or a POST request, so you don't need to figure this out yourself. But the key part here, the body may be empty, but in the headers, we manually are adding this X Tableau auth header. And into this is where we paste our token that we retrieved from that previous sign-in. So you recall when we signed into here, we had a token in our response, and I'm putting that token in as my Tableau auth. And this is what effectively allows me to keep interacting with the API. So when I send this, you can see I get this body at the bottom, and that is just a list of all of the different recommended views that there are for my user. That's the end of what I'm going to do in Postman. I'm just kind of give a rough idea of how these were working before dumping straight into the code. So for the code itself, we've actually handled this, or I've actually handled this in two pieces. So I've set up what we could use, to take a step back, we could use JavaScript directly in our embedded website to do all of this interaction and to go back and forth to the Tableau REST API. However, you sometimes can face issues with that to do with what's known as CORS or cross-origin response something. In short, it's when you're leaving your domain to go to a different domain, and some websites don't like that. By default, Tableau Server blocks that. You can change it as a Tableau Server administrator, but as I'm not a server administrator of Tableau Online, for obvious reasons, I have instead tried to navigate around that by, instead of going directly to the REST API, I have created a separate endpoint. I'm not going to go into a massive detail on the endpoint itself. You can Google this, or you can, I think you could probably set a similar thing up on Glitch, for example, without going through all of the steps. However, this allows me personally to have a system running on my machine completely internally. And the main part for that, just the code I'm showing on the screen now, which we won't dwell too much on, is simply the rough scaffold to set up an internal server. And we can see that internal server is specifically saying send hello world if someone comes to a specific address. And then if I go to that specific address, which is just my local host port, then I have hello world here. The meat of this is actually in the Tableau API .js file. And this is where I've constructed the JavaScript required to interact with the REST API. We have a few constants at the start just to keep things nice and simple. So again, our Tableau host, our Tableau version, and what I've called the path start, which is just basically combining API and the version. And I have a default options. So this is what we would send with a request. So again, we can see our host name, our port, and some headers. So the goal is we don't really need to worry too much about the headers. We can just keep using this same default options idea. And then I've created a function. And regardless, I mean, there's a fair bit further down on here, which we will briefly talk about, but the main benefit for everything on here is, quite frankly, within this function. This is a function that allows you to send an API request through to the Tableau REST API. It takes in a few parameters, which you can just leave as null. We have the method, so whether it's a put or a get. sorry, a push or a get. We have, sorry, a post or a get, sorry. We have the path, which is the end URL. So going back to our idea of these endpoints in Postman, specifically, we might be looking at this /recommendations type equals view, for example. That would be our path. And then we have a couple of headers and information to put through, along with an authorization token if required, and a body if required, and what we're expecting the response to be. Now, I've been going into quite a bit of detail so far. I'm going to lift the layer of explanation up a little bit, purely in the interest of time. But in short, what we have here is a function that allows us to do the JavaScript way of exactly what I've done in Postman by defining what a potential body would be for our request, defining headers if required, adding this xtableau auth header if we need. So obviously if the auth token is null, so most likely if we're signing in, we don't have an auth token, then we don't need to fill that in the header. And we have a small function here just to convert our body into a string that we can pass directly to the REST API. And this section here simply listens out for that answer. So we define a body, we say when data comes through, we add that data to our body, and once the request is finished, then that is when we would resolve our body. And this word resolve is part of the promise, and I will touch on promises in a moment. But what we have is whenever a request goes away, the data is sent back from the REST API, we catch it in this section, and actually this is the part of code that's actually sending that specific request to catch. So as a whole, most of my challenge was actually just defining this function and getting it working nicely so that I can do the other bits and pieces. When I mentioned a promise, you can see here I'm doing return new promise. This was the part that got me as a Python person. Python doesn't really deal with asynchronous calls much. You run a function, it waits till it finishes, and then you run the next one. So by wrapping things up into this promise idea, so pretty much my entire function is contained in this return new promise. That just means that nothing is returned from this function until the promise is complete or until the response has been provided by the REST API from Tableau. So picking up the pace a little bit from there, what we actually then have, we have a few functions that I'm not going to dive massively into, but each of these functions just uses that previous function to return the information we need. And these are all glued together at the end by this Tableau API endpoint that says, okay, whenever anyone accesses my Tableau API endpoint on my local machine, then take in the body that they've sent me. From that body, pull out all of those credentials, and then say, okay, first run an execution to do auth sign in. Then once we've signed in, we have our authorization token. So we can assign and store our token and our site ID, and then run another request specifically to get the recommended views. Then with that recommended view set, we then do another .then function. So for anyone that does a .then and finds that it returns a null after doing a promise, doing an asynchronous query, that's because you haven't wrapped it in a promise. So JavaScript executes the .then part before it's actually returned the information or retrieved the information. So that's where a promise came in. But we do our .then, and we have a set of recommended views from this endpoint, and then we loop through that. So I've got a function here that does retrieve views, which actually just loops through each of those recommended views and fires off another API request specifically to retrieve that preview image. So we can see here, retrieve preview image is just another promise that's running more of these Tableau API conversations, but this time using the specific workbook ID or view ID and the preview image. So all of that comes together to eventually return a big JSON object. So if I actually, back in Postman, instead, I can now trigger a request specifically to, you can see my localhost 3002 Tableau API, which is the server that I'm running. And if I execute this, then that is when it runs away, it takes my credentials and provides me, okay, these are all of your different entries. So I have the name is the basic dashboard, that's the content URL, and this massive bit of code here, that is the image that's returned. So catching that image is a little bit tricky. I recommend anyone, if they are specifically focused on that, take a look at my code. The short version is convert it, ask Tableau to send you the image in the format you want instead of trying to convert it once Tableau sent you it. And that's what all of my specific response format part is about, where I say if the response format is base 64 being the ideal format for an image to go into HTML, then set the responses encoding to base 64 and basically get Tableau to send me a base 64 image. So that's quite a bit that's gone on into the endpoint. Actually then running it in the end HTML is quite simple. You can see my HTML is quite small. I won't go into a huge amount of detail, as I think Loic did a great job of explaining the heads, bodies, etc. And I won't repeat his. But in short, all I've really got is a button that's doing my retrieve my recommended views and a container, so a div tag that's called recommended views wrapper, and that's just going to contain each of my different recommended view links. And as for my JavaScript, that again is actually quite short. It's still ideally, well, it's not as neat as it could be. But in short, my JavaScript here simply waits for this retrieve recommended views button to be clicked. When that button is clicked, we then execute this retrieve recommended views function. And this retrieve recommended views function will take the username and password from those boxes. So actually, if I just put this on the right hand side so we can see what that is. So it takes the username and password from these boxes at the top. It puts them into a JSON object called request body. And then it finds my local web server, so my HTTP localhost 3002, which is my machine, and specifically at the Tableau API endpoint. And it runs this function, get async, with the server. And all that get async does is, and I didn't write this piece of code, actually, this I just grabbed from Stack Exchange. It's pretty much a standard way of writing a response in JavaScript. Potentially, I could have done all of my REST API work with this kind of function, but as I mentioned before, I was facing those CORS issues. But the point is, when this function is executed, it will send a request to that URL with that body, and it will run a callback function. So it will run a function afterwards. And what I'm doing is I'm saying, run a request to this to my server with my body, which is just my login credentials, and then afterwards execute this display recommended views function. And display recommended views down here is simply taking the response, so taking that massive string, or actually the JSON object that contains all of them, and then it just loops one by one, so it does for each of them. It loops one by one and says, grab the name, grab the content URL, grab the image, and then append that image to my views wrapper. And that's this append views wrapper. And all that does is just say, okay, take that div tag, that wrapper, and add an image to it. And that's pretty much it. Thank you for everyone that stayed with me through that. I'm aware I went into quite a bit of detail at times. And it finalizes off just by running this on a click on an image, run that initviz function, which Loic described very well before. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. So now we are going to take some questions. So if you have any questions for Claire, Loic, and Chris, you can use the Q&A box on WebEx to ask them or on the chat. We have one question, I think, for all the presenter. now that you started using the JavaScript API, do you have any other internal or personal project for using the JavaScript API again? We can start with Claire, maybe, if you can unmute.
So I think using the JavaScript API definitely helps a lot with my roles creating a lot of the external reporting. When the clients is seeing our report on a website, now I can use the things I've learned here to kind of leverage what we can do.
Perfect. Thank you. Loic?
Definitely, I think I was really amazed about how cool it is when those filters get read on my site. I actually found a couple of other examples on the web, like there's a lot of YouTube videos around filters. I'm actually getting really inspired from that, and I'm definitely going to be looking into this because also my team, we are trying to, at the moment, trying to build a filter component. We're using a framework called Angular to display our views. And basically, we're going to be using the Tableau just API to basically present some filter to our customer. And yeah, and then maybe do more advanced stuff with the filter and even the actions, like for example, like scroll down into a specific data tables with the events that come from the filter. I mean, there are endless possibilities that I see in these interactions. Like be able to react to any event that happens in the dashboard is really amazing. Thank you.
Thank you. Chris?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned before, my company already have their own product based around this, so there isn't much opportunity for it kind of internally. But a lot of our clients have questions like this. So my plan really is to learn more and more as we go, and then that makes me a lot better at communicating with clients about the possibilities. And I've already built a few extensions, so my hope is to kind of just wrap around my knowledge so that I know a bit about extensions, a bit about the REST API, a bit about the JavaScript API, and then hopefully that will enable me to go away and build something cool in a few months' time. But in the meantime, it's just so interesting to learn it all, to be honest.
Talking about extension, we published yesterday the challenges for extension. So if you're interested in learning more about extension, the next 2 weeks are going to be focused on extensibility. I think, Loic, is a question for you. Is there any limits on how many filters you can add on a viz using the JavaScript API?
Yeah, I don't think so. I'm not quite sure. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you can add as you can have like it really depends on the number of filter you have created for your worksheet in Tableau Dev. So if you create like 10,000 filters, I probably it probably will be available in the API, but I don't know if it will be fast or not. But yeah, I think this only depends. It only depends on the number of filters I've created on Tableau Desktop when building the dashboard to workbook.
Yeah, that's correct. So as many filters as you want. After, be careful as any when you build your visualization. If you add 10,000 filters, how is it going to impact your performance? Luis, we have a question for you. Did you have install or prep steps to get up and running Atom or other Node.js?
So in order to actually execute this, I'm using, as you say, Node.js and Yarn to put the two together. If you go to my GitHub, so I think Gigi linked it earlier on the chat. On that page, the README does include just the rough steps to download and get that working. Atom-wise, I'm not using Atom. I'm using Atom as a text editor, but I'm not using it to host my pages themselves. I've just actually started up a PowerShell underneath to execute the npm or the Node.js start.
Perfect, thank you. So do you need to finish past mini challenges to do extension challenges? No, you don't have to. You can find all the challenges here on the top. So you have until June 1st to solve them. and you just need to solve this once. You don't have to do the past challenges. If you're interested in looking at past challenges, they are now at the bottom, and you can just always go back to it if you just want to practice and learn more about the challenges from the past weeks. Let's see. Can the JavaScript also get triggered from an action? I think maybe Chris or maybe Loic, can you take his question?
I think Loic handled that very well with his Mark's answer, so I'll let him take this.
Okay, Loic, all yours.
Yeah, I think yes. Actually, I don't know if I can share again, or I don't know this, but basically, it is possible. So you can listen to mark events on the dashboard and then respond to that, and then there's basically an event object that you receive. So let's see if I can do that right away. So yeah, okay. So this basically you basically receive a you basically have an event object here. You can this is called mark selection. You can use this. You can use this way. And what you do is that you basically add an event listener, and whenever you have a specific action that is, for example, a filter action, you can listen to the action to the mark selection event, and then receive the event and process what you want. Now, maybe it may depend on the actions you have, but for example, me, I had a filter action here. So if you click on a specific mark, basically filter the dashboard here, and then I just receive the data from this worksheet, and I filter my dashboard based on that. So it was possible. So I hope this answered the questions. I'm not really sure, but yeah.
Perfect. Okay, super. Thank you. So you actually really well understood the questions, just confirmed by the person that asked the question. I think that's it for the questions. Oh, the last one for Loic again. Did you consider using any other approach to display selected filter value other than the caption feature?
Basically, I hope I understand it well. So the caption filter, the caption is basically a this is basically a good print. So the caption here is basically an attribute of the filter object. So once you receive that filter object, actually have a lot of functions in between, but this is where you receive the filter objects here, here. So once you receive the filter objects or the filter objects in the list of array, you can basically use the console log function of JavaScript to basically log all the different filters that you receive, and then you put them on your console log. And once you're going to receive those filters, you're basically going to see the different properties that are available for the filter, and then this will show you the different values that are available. I get the caption is just a filter name, so if you want to have the name of the filter, in this case, this is there is another property called, for example, I think this is field name, but this is kind of like a technical name, and this is not something you want to show on screen. Actually, can do it right now if you have time. I don't know, but I can show you on my console log how it look like. I hope this will show up. Yes, so this is basically how it look like. So this is a filter object. You can see there's different properties there. You can see the data source name, the field name, sometimes null. So it depends on the filter type that you have. So really be careful. You can just log the data to see what's inside of it. It helped me a lot. So everything is there, and once you see what you're interested in, what is of your interest, you can just use the attributes in the code. So I hope this helped a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. So that is it for today's webinars on the embedding. So if you're interested in doing yourself the challenges, go to tableau.com/developer/mini challenges, and you have a set of challenges on extensions. And we have a webinar on extension by Keisha Rose, another developer advocate in the team that is going to go in deep in the developer and the extension API. So I think I was pausing my screen earlier, but that's the challenges are at the top. The current one, you have until June 1st, 8 a.m. Pacific time to submit your challenges. So thank you all again for joining. And if you want past challenges, you can go to the bottom. We covered these challenges in today's sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you to Claire, Loic, and Chris for the presentations. It was really useful, and I think everyone learned a lot with your presentations. Thank you again, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Gigi, bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.